Hello everyone, welcome to the next series, welcome to the next attempt at getting across what the other word means to me, what this channel, what this video project means to me. Now I did try to do this before in an indoor setting, however I felt that it was a bit inauthentic, so I've come out to the woods as the sun is setting in this late afternoon, and I thought I would reattempt a video in which I reminisce and contemplate various objects and events and places and times that are in some way sacred. In the first attempt, I looked at hills and mountains. Now, I don't have the images with me at the moment, however, I have them written down and they're committed to memory so much. They are, of course, so important to me that I really have no issue with remembering them. So, what this will be is essentially, I hope anyway, it will be not only a look back at where I've been and what I've done, but I hope that in some way it avoids the pitfalls of self-indulgent trip photos, that sort of thing. Hopefully it's a bit more weighty than that. The first image, 2013. This image is extremely special to me in that it represents what I take to be the very beginnings of my interest in nature, at least in terms of the engagement with wilderness. Of course, I had, over the past few years before that, I had become interested in wilderness skills and going out to various country parks and whatnot, some of which will be included in this video, but I had very, very slowly become interested in nature through World of Warcraft and then meeting, around this time in fact, meeting reminisce in Edinburgh. I met him during a talk and I told him that he had my respect. I remember that quite distinctly. But all this led up to the image that you're seeing now. It was my very first trip to the Scottish Highlands proper. The image is so important to me because it feels like a change in perception. The land itself is almost rising up to meet me. It's personified in a way. The very fact that all of the landscape is almost completely hidden. It feels like this change in perception. It's a paradox it's a contrast between gaining a clear view and then also almost the entire image is completely obscured. It's almost as if there's more to be met and understood and experienced the more I travel into the Highlands. This is a strange trip. It felt like entering another world. I feel like I've said that somewhere before, perhaps on my website. It's hard to describe. I had no real conception of what Scotland was like, my own country. I had no idea what it was like really, especially in the Highlands. And I felt that it took a century to get there. Just driving there, I could not drive at the time, someone else drove me. But I think that's what made it feel quite long as well. The very fact that I was just sitting there taking in the landscape on this March day, this very blistery, blizzardy March day. It was really something else. Now, before I go on to this next image, I just want to clarify or flag up that I'm quite a perfectionist when it comes to choosing representations of the things that I value. So I'm not entirely convinced that these images are the best images. Now, this second image, this was taken, I believe, a couple of months after. This is set in the Pentland Hills. I think this image would be more apt if there were 3 ram skulls, not 4. The reason for that is that this particular day was a very, very long trip to the Pentland Hills with my twin, Ryan, and my best friend, Stephen. I had, in a sense, found or discovered nature in all these various gradual changes in perception that I'd undergone in the past 3, maybe even 4 years. But this image represents us exploring nature together. We had spent the entire day in the Pentland Hills region, just near Edinburgh, just outside of Edinburgh, and we had found our way up into this rather secluded section where we discovered some skulls. 4 of them, in fact. It was a rather interesting find, and this was before I had any countryside management experience, before I had worked at Butts Ancient Farm and done all this outdoor. I had a very strong engagement with the outdoors, let's put it that way. So to find 4 skulls, I felt like a special moment, and not to idealise it too much, but we felt that it was in some way, our finding this was quite meaningful. So essentially we lined these skulls up on this pine tree. I believe there's a black feather as well. I think I remember quite distinctly, in fact, my friend Stephen, he said he knew that it would be important to me that first of all we discovered these skulls, and then we made a moment of it. What makes the image special for me, though, is that this is where Ryan, my twin, really discovered nature. Ryan wasn't as interested in nature as me at the time. He always respected nature in his own way, but until he had really gone out to the Pentlands and saw what Scotland was like, that's when he became a friend of nature, a companion of nature, and that's a kind of a secondary theme in this video, in fact. The third image, this is set in 2013 as well. All of these images, in fact, these 3 images were set in 2013. This is in the Cairngorms National Park in central East Scotland. This image is special to me because it represents my very first engagement with hiking, essentially. This is the highest that I'd ever been in Scotland. In fact, anywhere in the world. At the time. And what I find most enjoyable about this particular image is that it encapsulates so much. I think my favourite images are the ones that have, that of course must have more than one layer of meaning to them. I remember listening to the Tolkien Ensemble, and Vordruna as well, as I took in the landscape, and there's a certain cinematic quality to this image. Just below the ridge, just behind me, just beyond me, and what I believe is known as the Pass of Ravone, is a small lake, a small loch, or a lochen, as we say in Scotland, the Green Lochen. And it was such a fantastic moment, because I felt like it was the very first time that I became aware that the land had treasures to experience. I had no idea that it was going to be there, but we came down the summit, and just in this pass, what looked like a little green pool was in fact quite a rather large loch, or large as a small loch goes, a lochen goes. This glistening green crystalline loch, just absolutely beautiful. The sense of exploration and excitement and thrill came over me, and I remember this was just one of the best days of hiking that I ever had. Now this next image, I'm liable to ramble about this one, so I'll try and keep it brief. This one is it's a favourite of mine because it represents the peak of my outdoor experience, I have to say, at least in terms of elevation. Being fully immersed in a mountainous landscape. I can't say that I've bettered that experience, despite the fact that the image was taken in 2014. I almost said 2013, but I had moved down to England and then come back up for a 3-week work placement at Craigmeggy National Nature Reserve as part of my diploma in the first year in countryside management, and I was there for what felt like a very long time, doing population surveys, estate skills, deer skinning, wood chopping, fence making, all sorts of stuff. It was a very, very interesting time. I'd like to do something like that again. Definitely. It almost seems like a different world. But yes, the reason that we're up on the hill is that this was kind of the culmination of the trip. or the work placement. We were surveying dotterel, a rare upland bird that usually has its habitation in the mountains. I remember quite distinctly that we were walking in lines with walkie-talkies, all of us spread out in the distance, little black figures on the snow. I'd done nothing like that before, and I remember we actually woke up very, very early and we trekked the entire day across the Munro, Craigmeggy, and then I believe we also passed another Munro as well. I think we woke up at about 6 and then ended up back at the farmhouse at about maybe half 6. It was a very strenuous but enjoyable day. I remember when I got back, I wrote a document called Orod Nathon, which is a mountainous region in Tolkien's Legendarium, in which I described this experience. I didn't want to lose a single moment of it, so I wrote it down and sent that away to Ryan and Stephen. Great image. Now, there are many, many images that I could choose for this particular hill and mountain selection in this very first experimentation video, but I have to choose another Craigmeggy photo. Craigmeggy has become somewhat of a genius loci. It's been endowed with a genius loci. It's a spirit of the place, if I'm using that term in the correct way. I have a certain sense of reverence for the place because when I was on that 3-week work placement, I happened to go on a trek, a very long trek, down from the farmhouse, maybe about 2 hours into the mountains, to this corrie. A corrie is a bowl-shaped formation in the mountains with a small lock in the centre. And so that leads us on to the very next image. When me and Ryan came back to Scotland in 2017 on our very first road trip, our very first experience of returning to Scotland by ourselves, I had to take Ryan to Craigmeggy, and he proved his strength by doing the whole 2-hour trek in the cold and in the wet to the corrie. In 2017 we had created our Tolkien Memorised channel, in which we record and recite Tolkien songs and poems off by heart, and that's why Ryan, who is the figure in black, is wearing his cloak. We trekked all the way there, and unfortunately we couldn't record a video there. It was very cold, very, very windy as well, and we had to get back in time. Nevertheless, it's a crowning moment for me, and I think Ryan as well. We said some invocations to the mountains, and then we went all the way back. I think the trip took about it must have taken about 4 hours in total, if memory isn't distorted. I think the track was actually 2 hours either way, each way. The second last image. Ever since coming to England, I felt that I wasn't truly at home. Despite the fact that England is where I've gained most of my outdoor experience, where I've done 5 years of countryside management and wildlife ecology and conservation. All of that, however, hasn't really instilled a sense of home until I moved to where I am now, and where I've been living for, I believe, the past 3, maybe 4 years or so. Yeah, I think it was actually 2018 I moved to where I am now. And that all this is to say is that despite the fact that I grew up in Scotland, I feel at home now that I've explored this area, now that I've come out to places like this and I'm always recording outside. What this image truly stands for, though, is that it reminds me not to take things for granted. I think I used to. The very fact that I can come out to places like this, and I think despite the fact that all that I write about, all that I care about, is about changing people's perceptions and becoming more interested in nature and mythology and everything that I usually talk about on this channel, I've never been more aware of how much I would absolutely disdain and despise living in a built-up, crowded city with advertisements and things. And I feel truly sorry for people that are in that situation and want to escape. So yes, it's. I think I look at sometimes I look at this particular image to remind myself that I have it quite easy in terms of being able to actually access nature and have my life be enriched in this particular way. Now we come to the very last selection. I've saved this for last because I'm actually going in chronological order, but it's also the most important of the selection, and we're ending with Glencoe. This video was taken in 2022, just last year in the summer. Me and Ryan going up to Scotland for the first time since 2017. If Craig Meggie is important to us and it holds a sense of reverence, Glencoe is that, but extremely amplified. Glencoe is my favourite place on earth. It holds so much meaning to me that it's hard to put into words, and we've repeatedly gone back to Glencoe every handful of years or so. It's become more and more special. Even though there's a sense of being an aesthetic tourist, even though this is a very popular tourist destination, I think what makes it special is that we're almost in our own little bubble, in a sense. Hello everyone, it's Taylor from the future, about a week or so in the future. For some reason, I neglected to discuss a particular mountain in Glencoe. It is rather fitting, however, that I passed over in silence, because when we enter Glencoe, despite the fact that we're talking and we're listening to lofty and grand music, there's usually a point where we will stop speaking, and that is when we behold Bochiel Etive Mór at the very head of Glencoe. This mountain, it's become more and more of a character, a person, a personification of the land itself. Usually when we behold Bochiel Etive Mór, the emotions rise up. In many ways, speaking about it, I wish I was in better more, not better, but more fitting surroundings, more, I guess, rustic or a wild setting. I don't want to suggest that where I am is not pleasant in and of itself. Bochiel Etive Mór is so special for Ryan in particular that he is potentially going to get a tattoo on his forearm of Bochiel Etive Mór, although he's not particularly a tattoo person. Me and Ryan have never really been tattoo people. He, I believe, is going to get a tattoo of the mountain, surrounded by 3 trees, I think, perhaps a serpent, perhaps a snake as well, with the words "Nothing beside remains" from Ozymandias. If you ever have the chance to go to Scotland, if you ever have the chance to go to Glencoe, please visit. It might change your life. Glencoe really stands for everything. You feel changed when you enter it, and it's like a layering effect. Every time you enter it, you remember where you've been and what you've done, and it's kind of a place, like a touchstone, if I'm using that word correctly. It's coming back to home, but it's also not home, because it's almost like a place of transition. I remember just before we saw the 3 sisters, I saw just a dog walker on the side of the road as we were turning this bend, and there was a white Labrador, and it was just a particular moment in which I almost I genuinely teared up, because it's the mountains, it's the pine trees, it's wildlife, this obviously our love of dogs. All of it's sort of there in that one moment. And the reason that this particular day was so special as well is that we're going to record a video in the hills, Ryan's review of The King of Elfland's Daughter. And with that said, I think I'll leave it there for this Hills and Mountains episode. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm sure this can be improved somewhat, but I certainly enjoy being out here as the sun's going down, talking about my favourite hills and mountains. Till next time, everyone.